So hello friends, and welcome back for week 5 as we get into our new set of work for this week, where we're going to move beyond the idea of really basic sentences, and we're going to start to push out into ways in which both Greek and Hebrew deal with things like genitive and dative case, or relationships of possession and association. So we're going to be looking at things like the construct chain in Hebrew, and also the pronominal suffix system in Hebrew. And in Greek we'll just touch briefly on the genitive and dative cases, and we'll explore that a bit further with some of the exercises that we'll do in class. So, reminder with basic sentences, and this is simply even just looking at it in English, a basic sentence, there's going to be a verb, something is happening. There'll be a subject who's involved with that thing which is happening, and there'll be an object, or in terms of syntax, we talk about nominative case, we talk about verb, we talk about accusative case, and you'll notice the kind of color coding that we're using there, and which we will continue to use as we go through this. So something like Peter eats fish, as we know from a few weeks ago, Peter would be in the nominative case, although in English it's not written differently. Peter is the subject, the verb is what is happening, and the fish is the object, the thing which is being eaten. And we can elaborate that information, as we've seen, by adding adjectives, adverbs, determiners such as articles or personal pronouns. But today we're going to go a little bit further and tease this out with genitive and dative. And of course, when we are adding adjectives, adverbs, determiners, those things have to agree with the subject, or with the object, with the noun, depending which noun they're qualifying. They have to agree with respect to gender, with respect to number, and with respect to case, and we'll see some of that today as well. So we're going to start by going back to our wicked dog who has eaten the sandwich from under the desk. So let's unpack it a little bit. Just a reminder, we're going to just go over that sentence which demonstrates and illustrates some of the aspects of parts of speech. So you'll remember that we had the verb, we had the subject, we had the direct object, the sandwich and the fruit in the original form of the sentence. We had various determiners, articles, personal pronouns and so on, which tell us something more specific about the noun. We had a conjunction, we had some prepositions, we had an indirect object in the case of the table, and of course we had the interjection. So that gave us the kind of the basic parts of speech that we were dealing with. Okay, nominative, verb, accusative, indirect object, so dative in the case of Greek. In English we do it usually by a preposition, and then I've edited the sentence ever so slightly, so now we're saying it's the table of the teacher, or as we would typically say in English, the teacher's table. Okay, so I've added in a possessive in English, or genitive when it comes to Greek, or it would be construct. It will be part of a construct chain if we were looking at it in Hebrew. In fact, let's look at it in that way. So we again keep those color codes down the bottom for reference, and we put the sentence up, exactly the same sentence going up in Hebrew. Okay, now in this case, the really sharp-eyed students will notice that I've made just a couple of tweaks from when I sent this information out, perhaps on Friday or Saturday. One is that I've changed the way that I've written the word sandwich, and what's happening there, it's in the pale green, because it's the direct object of the verb akal, to eat. I'm trying to remember specifically how a sign on a hamburger joint outside the border crossing at Bet-Shean was written. I remember sitting there opposite the little cafe food shop, looking at those words in Hebrew and trying to work out what was being said, and then realizing they had just written the English word sandwich in Hebrew letters. So this is not the Hebrew term for a sandwich, which would be kurit. Rather, it's transliterating in everyday modern Israeli the English word sandwich, because that's also what they use in everyday speech. So we have Oi lo akal hakaleb et sandwichka matachat le shoken hamore. Oh no, ate the dog your sandwich from under the desk of the teacher. And more is the Hebrew word for teacher. So there's the same sentence, the word order is slightly different. And those of you who speak Arabic will have already noticed that kelb and kalb are the same, basically the same word, the word for dog. And also that tachat is very similar, the preposition for under. Now, if we look at this in terms of a Greek sentence, and again, there's a couple of little tweaks that I've made. So what I did in creating these sentences in Hebrew and Greek, I initially simply translated them using the translator app on my computer, translated them into modern Israeli Hebrew and modern Greek. And then I've gone back over it over the weekend as I've looked at it and thought, that's not quite right, this is not quite right. I've made a couple of tweaks here and there so that the Greek, which while it was readable and it was correct modern Greek, I've modified the Greek so it's gone back to, if you like, Koine Greek from 2000 years earlier. Ho achi, ho kuon efege to santutis or santuitis. Now let's try that again. To santuits su apokato apo tu trapedzu tu diaskalu. Oh no, the dog, he eats the sandwich, your sandwich, from the table of the teacher. Okay. Now the point of all that is not to tell you not to put your sandwiches under my table. It's of course just to play with the idea of more elaborate sentences which are possible once we introduced the indirect object and also the sense of the possession or association, which in English and Greek we would call genitive case or possessive case. So I hope those little examples just help you see the principles working out in examples in both Hebrew and Greek. And there's this dog again running off with the sandwich from underneath the teacher's table. So as I've mentioned a couple of times over the last week or two, eventually we would get to a form within biblical Hebrew and indeed modern Hebrew, which is called the construct chain. In Hebrew it's called smikut, and in Arabic exactly the same form exists and it's called idafa. So again, some of you in the class who are familiar with Arabic will know exactly where this is going. So the construct is a way in which Hebrew and other Semitic languages express the of relationship between two nouns, and they do it by joining them into a chain, putting them side by side in a way that creates a relationship between the two terms. So in the example that's there in the middle of the screen, we have ebed or eved, servant, and then we have Hamelech, the king. And that will be translated, as you can see, the servant of the king. Now we'll talk about where the comes from in a moment, but the principle is just to identify the idea that two words put side by side create a construct chain. As I've also mentioned in earlier weeks, we do a little bit of this with words like train station, bus station. We put two nouns together and we just know that when we say bus station, we mean the station that is there for the bus and for the passengers who are waiting to catch the bus. Okay. In this case, Eved HaMelech, servant of the king, or actually the servant of the king, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So if we go to how that you've got what's called the absolute form and the construct form. The noun which is being linked to the other one, so servant of, that's the construct noun, and the word in this case king, to which the other one is being attached, okay, the absolute noun, that will be the form that you'll find the word in the lexicon, although with software that's not such a big issue these days. So it looks like this in the case of Genesis, first couple of verses out of Genesis 1. We actually have three examples of the construct chain in Genesis 1 verse 2. Okay, so reading from the top, from the beginning. Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning God created, et hashamayim va'et haaretz, God created the heavens and the earth. Va'haaretz, and the earth, haita was, tohu v'bohu, empty waste, formless void, whatever. V'chasek, and darkness, al panei hayom. Okay, al panei tahom, not hatom, but tahom, the deep. So you've got panei tahom, face of the deep. The ruach Elohim, and wind or breath or spirit of God. Tricky phrase to interpret, but a wind or breath or a spirit associated in some way with God. And this, so the darkness, Hoshek, was upon the face of the deep, and a divine wind, if you want to put it that way, was hovering. Merekfet was kind of hovering, al panei ha'mayim, upon the face of the waters. Okay, mayim. So again, we've got three construct phrases: panei tahom, ruach Elohim, panei ha'mayim. So when we're looking at construct phrases, we can see that two or more words can be linked together, associated with each other in the construction. The final word, the tail, is always in the absolute sense, and it may have the definite article, which is the case, in fact, up here. We've got the definite article in front. The first word or words are in the construct case, and they can never have the definite article. If the phrase is definite, then the article will be attached to the absolute word, not to the construct word. The tail noun, the word at the end, is what we would call genitive or possessive case, and its default meaning includes of. Okay, so for example, you'd say the face of the deep, or a wind or a spirit from or of God, but you may end up translating that as a divine wind, a divine spirit would be another way of doing that. So the final word, the word which is in the absolute, will have the sense of as a default meaning, and then you have to massage it to get the best translation. The head noun in Hebrew may be shortened, and shortened in particular by reducing its final syllable. So where we've got Panei Tahom and Panei Hamayim, it would normally have been Panaim, but the final meme has dropped off, and we get the expression, we get the form Panei, and we're going to find this particularly with the word for son. It's going to be B'nai Yisrael, for example. It's going to occur quite a lot. And the words may be, although they're not here, they may be joined by that horizontal line called a makef, which we see between the preposition and the head noun, but we don't see it between the head noun and the tail noun in these particular examples. But sometimes that little horizontal line will be there as well. Now this is a very common form in the Hebrew Bible. There are more than 9,700 construct nouns in the Torah being Genesis through to Deuteronomy, and there are more than 36,000 construct nouns within the Tanakh. That's the Torah, the prophets and the writings, the Torah, Nevi'im and Ketuvim, or the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, depending how you want to refer to it. So this is just a distribution chart as part of the results panel from Accordance, and you can see that this kind of structure is used quite substantially across all 5 books of the Torah or the Pentateuch. And if you go to another kind of results screen from Accordance, you get this pie chart, which in Accordance itself, as I move my mouse over those other fragments, it'll tell us what those words are. But of the 9,700 times we have construct nouns in the Torah, 1,300 of them are simply the word kol, which is one of the words you know. It's the word for all, and it's often found in the phrase Kol Yisrael, all Israel, construct phrase. And the second most common is the word son, ben, and so ben, even the word Ben Yamin is a construct phrase, basically, son of the south, and it will often occur as B'nai because it's in the plural form. And then you have, of course, many other examples. Just as an aside, let me pause that, open my Accordance and show you how I did that. So I'm going to enlarge my biblical text screen. I'm going to do a search, and I'm wanting to search for a feature in the Hebrew text, the construct. So the way I do that, first of all, I need to change up here, I need to change the main text that will be shown in the right top left-hand corner. I need to change that to my BHS, Biblical Hebrew Stuttgartensia. It doesn't change what's appearing on the screen, but it means that Accordance knows I'm wanting to work primarily from the Hebrew text. I then go up to search, and I'm going to say I want to look for a tag, enter tag, and I'm going to look for nouns, and I'm going to look for nouns when it comes to state that are in the construct state. Okay, and so that's ready. The search is all set up, but it has not yet been done. You'll notice the search is described over here. This is what I'm looking for. Okay. I had previously had a search there looking at Mark chapter 1 verses 9 to 11, and it's remembered that. I'm just going to delete that. So now my search term is simply nouns in the construct form, but I need to set the range of my search. So I'm going to come down here to range, and I'm going to select These are ones that I've set myself. So I'm going to select Torah. Now I simply hit enter to do the search. You can see in the center all the nouns which are in construct are identified in red. And if I go up to my search results, this little thingy here, I click on that and I can show, let's say, so I'm going to see the default analytics. So that's a concordance, that's very nice. It's not what I'm looking for. That's the hits graph that you've seen already. This is the pie chart. And as I move around, it'll tell me which are the different Hebrew words that are included in the search results, okay, and how often. And then there's a bunch of others that are too few, but they still make up almost 50% of the sample, okay. So that was just a little bit of a heads up of how you might do that in accordance. So let's come back into our presentation. Okay, so the construct form is incredibly common. You're going to find it occurring lots and lots of times, and the way in which you will see it immediately is it'll be noun of second noun. Okay, that'll be the phrase, and in your instant details the noun will be identified as being in the construct case. Okay, now let's look at some examples and we'll go over these in class for people to ask questions. So, Kol Ha'isha, voice of the man, so that means it is the voice of the man. Okay, if the second noun or the final noun is definite, okay, then the whole phrase is definite. So although there can never be a definite article on the noun in the construct case, nonetheless it picks up the definiteness from the absolute noun. So Kol Ha'ish, the voice of the man. Melech Haaretz, the king of the land. Ebed or Eved HaMelech, the servant of the king. Devar HaNavi, the word of the prophet. Sefer HaTorah, the book of the the book of the law. Okay, so you can see it's a simple enough phrase, but this is a very powerful little linguistic device that's used within Biblical Hebrew. So when it is Sefer HaNavi, it's the book of the prophet. When there is no article on the final noun, then it just becomes Sefer Navi, a book of a prophet, or we would say a prophetic book. Okay, so if the article is on the final noun, the whole phrase is definite. If there is no article on the final noun, the phrase itself is indefinite. So there are three ways to make a construct phrase definite. Definite can be either because there's an article, the word of the queen, Devar HaMalka, or because the final noun, the absolute noun, has a pronominal suffix, and we're going to introduce you to pronominal suffixes in this session. So if you've got Avi, which means my father, then Beit Avi becomes the house of my father, because it's a specific house. It's the house which belongs to my father, that house, if you like. And the other way is if the final noun is a proper noun, somebody's name, like the word Shmuel, Samuel, then Eved Shmuel becomes the servant of Samuel, because Samuel is a specific person. So all of those three ways will make the construct phrase definite. Then you could add 2 or 3 words together in a construct chain, So here's some examples of that. So if we have Eved, Chi, Hamelech, then that becomes the servant of the brother of the king. Both the Eved and the Ach, or Achi, with the construct form there, these become definite because Melech has the article. The servant of the brother of the king, Eved, Achi, Hamelech. If we have the Eved, Beit, Hamelech, then it's the servant of the house of the king. The servant of the house of the king. And if it's the words of the king of the land, Devarim, or Divrim, Melech Haaretz, the words of the king of the land, because the final word being definite means each of the previous nouns also become definite. Similar kind of thing happens with abstracts, and bearing in mind this is not stuff you're going to be asked to remember. It's just giving you an overview at this point so that when you run into this very common syntactical form, you'll have a sense of what's going on. So when you have an attributive adjective, we'll come back to adjectives in a couple of weeks' time, but they can occur in the predicate form or in the attributive position. When it's an attributive adjective, something being attributed to the primary noun, then the attributive adjective modifies either the construct noun or it can modify the absolute noun. It still has to come at the end. It can't break into the sequence, but it will agree in gender and number and definiteness with the noun from the chain that it is intended to modify. Now that sounds a bit, what's going on here? We look at these examples. We have Melech, Haaretz, Hatov, king, the land, the good. Now, Eretz is a feminine noun. The adjective is not a feminine adjective. It's the simple masculine adjective tov, meaning good. So Hatov is referring to Melech, because Melech is a masculine word. So Melech Haaretz Hatov is the good king of the land, whereas Melech Haaretz Hatova is the king of the good land. King of the land, the good, because Hatova is Tov in the feminine form, so it's not an attribute of Melech, it's in an attributive relationship with Eretz, which is land. So just a little tweak there, which if there's some ambiguity, this is where the inflected nature of the biblical languages becomes a very practical assistance to us. So we'll talk about this in class, but for now, just work over these examples, replay the last few minutes of the video, get familiar with the concept of the construct state. So while we're pushing your learning out into slightly deeper waters, let's have a look at the personal pronouns, and particularly suffixes, the way that personal pronouns can be attached to nouns in biblical Hebrew. So we're going to have first, second, third persons, and because we're talking about a very inflected language, both the second person and the third person will be inflected for number and also for gender. Okay. So when the pronouns occur independently, it's going to be words like ani, ata, at, hua, and hia. Okay, or he. I was slipping into Arabic there. Okay, hua and he. I just happen to be more or less the same as in Arabic. In the plural, it's going to be anaknu, atem, atana or aitana, hem, hem, and hen. Okay, hem, and hen. What we're talking about, that's when they occur as standalone independent pronouns. We're not trying to master that at this stage. What we are looking at is when the pronouns are fixed, attached as a suffix on the end of a noun. Now we've seen this occurring already, but let's now look at what the system is. So if it's first person singular, it has an E sound at the end. If it's second person masculine singular, it has ka on the end. And if it's feminine, it has k on the end. If it's third person masculine singular, it's O at the end. And surprise, surprise, if it's third person feminine singular, it has an R sound on the end of the noun. In the plural, that's going to become nu instead of E. It's going to become kem instead of ka. It's going to become ken instead of k. It's going to become hem instead of o, and it's going to be hen in place of r. Alright, now we've already seen some examples of that, and these are not things for you to be worrying about learning at this stage, but it's to show you the patterns, because already we are starting to run into them, as we've seen. In the case of the Shema, there's nu at the end of Eloheinu, so that is God of us, or our God. There's also ka at the end of Elohim, and if you're thinking about this, what's happening is the final meme has dropped off, and instead of the final meme, you have this personal pronoun as a suffix. So Elohim becomes Eloheinu. Elohim becomes Eloheka. And the same thing in the final phrase. So with all your heart, Levavka. With all your soul, Nefeshka. And with all your strength, Ma'adaka. Okay, so these are personal pronouns attached to the end of the noun as a suffix, and already we've started to run into these. Now let's switch across to biblical Greek, New Testament Greek, because similar things are happening with the genitive, which is the direct cousin, if you like, of the construct case, and also the dative case. So let's think about how these things function in English. In English, we use the possessive case, which is what we call genitive in Greek, construct in Hebrew. The possessive case is used to indicate possession, and in English you can either put of in front of the word of God is true, or we can use an apostrophe S. Okay, God's word is true. Okay. The indirect object is the person or the thing which is affected indirectly by the action of the verb. It's involved in the action in some way, but not directly. For example, Karen threw Brad a ball. The direct object is the ball, since that's what's being directly involved in the action. The ball is what was thrown. Brad is related to the action of the verb, but Brad is the indirect object. Karen threw the ball. Okay, so Karin threw a ball to Brad, we might say. Or we can, by word order, we can get rid of the need for the preposition and just say Karen threw Brad a ball. And we can understand that it's unlikely, it doesn't make sense to read that in any other way than Karen threw a ball to Brad. Okay. So we would often express that in English by putting the little preposition to in front of the word. well, we don't do that in Hebrew or Greek, although we'll do it in the translation. Okay. English doesn't have a separate case for the indirect object. We don't have an equivalent of dative. We use the same form as the direct object, but we add in to the expression. Okay. So what that looks like in Greek is that you can't add an apostrophe s, apostrophe sigma in Greek. So we do it using the genitive, and so if our sample sentence was everyone breaks the laws of God, then God would be genitive. It would be of God, to theou, would have that genitive case ending. The genitive case endings, as we've already seen, tend to feature the upsilon in the singular. It may be there may be some other things going on there, but upsilon is a very common genitive singular ending. And of course, as we've seen, in the genitive plural ending, it's simply own. Okay, ongama, nu. So if you see the word logu, you would know it's singular and that it's genitive. If you see the word logon or akon or ergon, you would know that it's plural and is also demonstrating some relationship, showing either possession or association. Again, as we've seen in English, the possessive is indicated by the apostrophe. We don't have that option in Greek. So there'll always be, your initial translation will be in the of form. Okay? So nomoi tu theou, laws of God. You can't do it the other way around. Always think of the of. And the word in the genitive usually follows the word that it's nominating. Okay, so this is the opposite of Hebrew. The word it modifies is called the head noun, and again that's very different use than what we get in Hebrew. So I'd say don't worry about using head noun language for our purposes. So what does that look like? Oh, sorry, we got the dative as well. If upsilon is the typical vowel that you'll find in a genitive case ending, iota is the typical noun that you're going to find in the dative endings. If it's singular, it's going to be the iota by itself, possibly subscripted. And if it's plural, it's going to be iota sigma. And we're familiar from the definite article, tois, tais, tois. That's that iota sigma, dative plural. Okay. The dative in Greek has a wide range of usage, and it covers things that we would translate in quite different ways in English. It may mean to, it may be in, it may be with, it may be by. Okay, so it's expressing an indirect relationship, but it's not as simple as simply to. And so you've got this idea of the indirect object. Okay. So, and we will find as we go along, and we've already seen it, but it'll become clearer in a couple of weeks' time, that various prepositions are paired with a particular case. The famous one is that N is always followed by dative case. Okay, so let's have a look at this. We've already done some reading out of Mark chapter 1 verses 9 to 11. We're going to do a bit more in class on Wednesday night and a bit more the week after. Let's look at the whole paragraph, and I'm just color coding it in terms of genitives and datives. So the genitives are in orange, and the couple of datives that are there are in blue, because that's the color pattern we used earlier in the session. Okay, so we have N, preposition N, up here in the first line. In the days, in those days, and we have, because Hamera is a feminine noun, then we have Hamerais, we have the feminine article, tais, and even the demonstrative ekanai becomes ekanais. So all of these words are agreeing in their form, and it's in those days. The only other dative is down the very last line. We have en soi, in you, and this we will come to the personal pronouns in Greek in a couple of weeks' time, but in you I am well pleased. And then we have a number of genitives, and the genitives are all following after a preposition, and I'll put the preposition in grey. So we have apo, and then we have Nazareth, from Nazareth. Which Nazareth? Nazareth tes Galileas, okay? So Nazareth, so from Nazareth of Galilee. So that's saying where Jesus was coming from, and also where Nazareth was located, okay? And as he's coming up, ek to hudatos, as he's coming out, out from, if you like, to hudatos, from the water. Again, the definite article makes it very clear that it's a genitive singular, and the hudatos is a form that, of course, is a third declension. And the other two examples, down the bottom, end of the second last line, ek, same word as up here, ek, tone. As soon as you see tone, you think genitive plural. Ek, tone, uranone, from the heavens, because we know the word uranois and so on from the Lord's Prayer. And then we have mu, you are the son of me, my son. So again, that's a genitive, but this is a genitive of the first person pronoun. So you'll find that these are incredibly common forms, just as the construct chain is used a lot in biblical Hebrew. Genitive and dative are going to be used a great deal in the New Testament Greek. So we'll have a chance to workshop this a little bit in class, and guess what? The weekly exercise is probably going to ask you to do a bit of work in this as well. So looking ahead in terms of the vocab this week, we have 5 Hebrew and 5 Greek words. So we have davar and yashav. Okay, I'll just bring up the transliterations. Davar, yashav, and then dabar, yad, and berit. So speak, sit or dwell, settle if you like, word, hand, covenant. Now notice the consonants for speak and the consonants for word are exactly the same. Alright? Davar. It's just a question of the pointing, which is going to tell you whether it's a noun or a verb, and if it's a noun, whether it's plural or singular, and whether it's in the construct state or the absolute state, or has an article attached to it. Okay? So, davar, yashav, davar, yad, and berit, covenant. Then on the Greek side we have Lego, which are not little plastic building blocks, but Lego is the verb for I say, very common. Mathetes, the word for disciple, so you would learn it as hot mathetes, that's the nominative singular form, hot mathetes, and then you'd learn mathetu, and it's telling you this is actually a masculine third declension noun. Logos, hot logos, logu, the word for word, okay. Kair, hey kair is the word for hand, and kairos, and of course from that we'll get words like chiropractor. And diatheke, hey diatheke, the covenant or the agreement, and diathekes, the genitive singular. So logos is where we get our quite common Greek root ology in like theology and geology and so on. And chiropractor is derived from the Greek word for hand, somebody who's using their hands. So you're slowly building up your vocab, and by this stage, by the time you've added these 10 words, you'll be about halfway through the vocab we ask you to learn during this course. Again, a reminder, these words have been chosen partly because of their frequency and partly because of their theological or grammatical significance. And just a quick look at the week ahead. So the Monday video, that's what you're doing right now. The vocab items from numbers 41 through to 50. The weekly exercise, which will be due by Sunday night. Obviously we have the class on Wednesday evening as well, although it's not listed there. And then if you've got time and energy for a little bit of additional reading, I'd really encourage you to read chapter 26 from the world of the New Testament, which is that chapter on Jewish education, because our cultural knowledge this week is going to be looking at education in Jewish society around the time of Jesus. So that's it, folk. I hope you found this video useful as you kind of begin to break open the major language learning task for this week. The contract chain in Hebrew, the personal pronouns being suffixed or attached to the end of nouns, and then simply the way in which genitive and dative forms are used to enrich and elaborate and extend from basic sentences to more complicated sentences. So I look forward to any questions you might have. You can pop them up in the forum, and of course we'll have a chance to unpack some of this in class on Wednesday evening as well.